Well, and then there's the objects, and then there's all those stories that grow out of the
Yeah,
objects, right?
yeah. Look, and when we talk about digital versus practical effects, the one thing that I would say probably that would suffer the most from that revolution is the stories. Oh yeah, we were shooting a gag where a zombie bit a guy's neck out, and then on action, the zombie rips the neck out, and there's no blood. And I'm off camera, and I look down, and the actor's standing on the blood tube. And I'm like, oh no. And then in my head, I'm like, as soon as that actor moves his foot, we're in trouble. And the actor would lift his foot up, and then the fire hydrant of blood. You don't equate those kinds of stories to, I was sitting at my computer, and I had a cup of coffee, and then a friend of mine came in and told me about the new Star Wars movie. That's not the same story.
Oh, he's so pretty.
Come on.
So you just did this as a homage to Jack from American Werewolf. Mm-hmm. He's so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is this foam or is it silicone?
Yeah, this is foam. And this is it literally just has a little bit of a neck movement and a little bit of a jaw movement. And then you can pose the head, because we didn't do a neck mechanism.
Gotcha.
Norman Cabrera sculpted this, who's like the biggest Rick Baker fan on the planet, and super talented. But you know, during the 12 years of The Walking Dead, the goal always was, we got to put some like tributes in there.
Of course,
so
of course,
always
of course.
So this was in there. I remember Gail Ann Hurd kind of went, what is that doing in there? Like, son of a bitch,
She
caught
recognized
me. She kind of, it was one shot, and like, Michonne's walking through a field with a bunch of walkers, and then like this one just kind of comes through at the end. Yeah. And I think she was like, we should trim that shot, because that one looks like a puppet. I'm like, it is a puppet, and I'm not trimming it. It's staying there. Thank God I was the director on that episode, because I was able to not cut it out.
We're in your office here. This is some of your favorite things that you just like looking at every day.
Well, some of these characters we created, some were created by other artists. We got a Glenn Strange Frankenstein back here. We got a creature from the Black Lagoon in the corner. Nobody puts baby in the corner, but he's in the corner. We have a Wolfman. I always wanted the characters to always be dynamic when you look at them. So like, I love that he's crouching.
No, and that crouch feels completely real.
And it's like from the beginning of Frankenstein Meets a Wolfman, where he lands on that sack of stuff, and then the police officer sees him and blows a whistle, and he goes, and then leaps off. So a lot of this stuff is, you know, this is the original Creep from Creepshow, which is built off of a real skeleton.
There's a real human skeleton in there?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That was, you know, because look, back in the day, this was in the late 80s, you could call Carolina Biological.
Right.
And they would send you a skeleton from India.
And it was not that much.
It's like $400.
Yeah.
On Day of the Dead, that was my first purchase, was buying 5 skeletons. And then we molded the heads, and then we sculpted zombie faces for them for bodies. But then every once in a while, Tom's like, yeah, we should make a mechanical jaw. And they'd start drilling into it, and it smelled like you were at the dentist office.
No
good.
good.
The drill going into the bone, you're like, whoa.
Okay, I want to talk about this guy.
This is one of the greatest werewolf designs in history.
I totally agree.
And, you know, look, when we were younger, when the internet didn't exist, the only way that you could find out anything about these creatures was either Famous Monsters magazine, Cinefex magazine, or Fangoria. That was kind of it.
Yeah.
And there was an article about the Howling in Cinefantastique, and it was talking with Rob Bottin, and they had a picture of Jeff Shank, who was one of the fabricators who worked on this, in his driveway, laying yak hair on this puppet. So through a mutual friend, we were able to acquire it. It sat in somebody's garage for years, and at Halloween, they'd put a cape on it, and they'd put it in their front yard. And it just sat there, and it was rotting and decomposing, and
still presiding over the correct holiday. I like that.
Yes, well, that's all it had going for it. So when I got it, it was in really, really bad shape. There was the chest was rotted away, and there was like a piece of black fun fur, like pinned to it or sewn to it. The head was really rotted. So between Tom Spina and I, we did a big full restoration on this. Tom did the face and did an amazing job on
He's
the
a
head.
magician with that
He
stuff.
really is.
Because this is foam, originally was foam latex.
It's foam.
yes?
I mean, it's so delicate. Like
Yeah.
even if you were like to move anything on it, it would probably that face was foam. The hands were latex. But what's interesting about this is the original fur was all hand laid yak hair.
Right.
And the way you lay it is you pull the hair and then you cut it on an angle and you lay it and then you put more glue and you lay it and you build up layers. So
Okay.
it looks like the fur's growing over top of each other. The original fursuit is still on there.
Okay.
Or the original fur is still on the understructure. But I wanted it to look kind of like it originally looked. So we sculpted a new chest for it, and then we used 4-way stretch material.
Yeah.
And we made a new fur suit that we could slide over the original puppet.
Amazing.
So that if anybody ever said, oh, why would you alter the original Howling Werewolf? I'm like, we didn't.
You didn't.
It's all in there. If you look in the back, if you were to unzip it,
Yeah.
it's all, you could actually see the original fur still underneath there. You know, when we started restoring this, you know, I did the hands and the feet.
Yeah.
And the trick was some of them were missing. Some of the fingers were missing, some of the toes were missing. So what we ended up doing was digitally scanning them and then flopping them in the computer and printing new ones so that we could replace the pieces. Even on this, like if this hand, if you look at this rod, in the backs of these, it had a little bicycle controller.
Oh,
that had cables that went down to the fingers so that the puppeteers could operate the hands from behind here. And Joe Dante came to the office a year ago and saw it. I took a great picture of him standing here. And I said, hey, you know, I think I told him ahead of time. I said, you know, I got the original Howling Werewolf. He goes, oh, yeah. He said, we barely shot it. And I said, why? I said, because when they brought it to set, they're like, okay, now we got to cut holes in the walls of the set to be able to operate it. And Joe was like, well, I can't cut holes in the walls of the set. What are you guys, crazy? So we see the feet, and I think there's a few photos of this particular head that you see, but I don't think we ever really see the full werewolf.
It's a shame because he is so
it's magnificent.
beautiful.
I mean,
also, I love the clear teeth.
The clear teeth. Even just the way that, and again, this werewolf, the fact that the waist is thin and it's got that barrel
big
chest.
dog, that thorax.
The dog chest, even the stovepipe neck. You know, this is kind of, I think Rob's design really was so iconic that people just assume that if werewolf existed, this is what it would look like, you know.
He is so
and it's so different from Rick's. I mean, Rick's was beautiful. It was four-legged, and you know, I mean, I've talked to Rick about it a lot, and he's like, yeah, John Landis fell in love with it and shot it way more than we were ever supposed to shoot it, because I sculpted it in an expression for a reason, because it was supposed to be quick shots. Right. And then, you know, John's like, it was so great, I couldn't not shoot it. I'm like, hey, that's a compliment.
Yeah.
And it still holds up, too. I mean, the fact that this werewolf and that werewolf,
they still look as good. If that movie was released today, that would be, those would be amazing effects sequences.
Without a doubt.
I'm curious just about the actual process of making this fursuit. You sewed the dance stretch fabric as a onesie or over, and then did you just lay on the yak hair?
We got it from National Hair Tech.
Oh, NFT.
Yes.
Okay.
National Fiber Tech.
Yeah.
They make four-way stretch fabric that they hand tie.
This is from them. Gotcha.
So we got it. I mean, we actually had some of it left over. And this was all punched. And with the face, because the foam was so delicate, Tom's people did a great job of crimping the hair and laying it.
Oh, wow.
So that it looks textured. I mean,
I was totally amazed about that technique. Steve Neal did it on a commission for me.
Yeah.
And I come from punching, and he did all this laying, and it looked amazing. It was like totally.
And there's also ways where you can put the adhesive on and then glue the hair so the hair looks like it's not laid flat.
Oh, really?
But that it's standing up. Like sometimes if you'll do like, you know, Prozaid and Cabazil, and you'll build up a little layer.
Right.
And then you have to figure out how to keep the hair from
hold it in there while
holding
it
it.
dries. Gotcha.
But when you do that and then it dries, it looks like the hair's growing out of it instead of laid flat. But you know, it's all about the texturing and stuff. You know, one thing that people don't think about is the hair work itself. Usually, you know, you sculpt it, you mold it, you paint it, you run, you put the hair on, and then everyone's like, okay, let's go. And
right.
There's those last minute details or what bring things like this to life. Like just a little bit of of product to make the hair like clumped together, even on the corners of the arms. You know, when we styled this,
right, these
we sprayed it. We combed it back and sprayed it so that it looked like animal hair. You know, it had to look authentic. Even the pose. You know, when I got this, it was like just laying on a sound blanket. So we built this whole stand so that we could support it and put it into a pose that kind of emulates the pose from that Cinefantastique article, which is so great.
I gotta say, it's almost evolutionary how unpleasant it is to stand in front. Like there's part of my body that's like, this is dangerous.
Well, the face. I mean, look, the color of the eyes, the face, the teeth. I mean, there's so many great things about this particular character that is it's just iconic. I mean,
I love also that the product here making this a little shape.
You gotta, because if you didn't do that, I have pictures of the wolf before we styled the hair. And the hair is just kind of all. It looks like like my hair. It's all combed, and my hair doesn't look that good, but the hair looked too clean. When I just always, when we're on Walking Dead and you're looking at, a zombie makeup and it's got a wig on it. I would tell the guys constantly when we were touching up zombies, go through with a spritz bottle, put conditioner in the hair to make the hair look stringy and pull the hair forward so there's clumps of it. Otherwise, it looks too clean. You have to think about all that kind of stuff. Even dressing blood, my big pet peeve always was when I would look at makeups and you could see that somebody painted blood. I'm like, you can never paint blood. Never use a Q-tip, never use a brush. What we would do is we'd get a cup with blood in it or, like tattoo color, and we'd spatter it. Use the edge of the cup and the brush to spatter it because the blood tells a story. On Walking Dead, if you have a bullet wound here, the blood isn't going to just dribble down. It's going to splatter outward. So I would always say, splatter the blood. It tells a story.
There's a mark on Harrison Ford's face from Blade Runner, late in the movie, where he's dirty. And it's like this mark that looks like a spot of dirt hit, dried around the edges, and then was washed away. And it's like this piece of, I'm like, did a makeup artist get that right and carry it from scene to scene, or was it just a lucky happenstance?
It probably happened, and then they were like, "Well, shit! Now we gotta do it every time from now on in." Anyway, so this is one piece of I know you collect stuff. And the question always is why? Why do people collect things? And for me, it's remembering those moments when I was young that I saw something that inspired me. If it's the Jupiter 2 from Lost in Space or the Spindrift from Land of the Giants, like all those sort of iconic pieces that somehow or another rewired your brain
to the rest of your life.
Yes, and this is one of them. And I've been fortunate enough through my career to meet people like you, and you meet other people, and then somebody will be like, hey, the Jupiter 2 is going up for sale. And you're like, wait, what? And, now it's sitting in my house.
I love looking at the things in my collection and being re-inspired by them constantly. And also, I'm older now, and I realize I'm just a current steward of these things.
Well,
and I'm grateful to be the steward at this time.
That's a really, really, really good point, because, a lot of us have been the proprietors. We talk about Bob Burns. Bob was the first and still the greatest film proprietor.
Right.
I mean, I always used to love the idea of just thinking of him in his house wearing, he's like the Rod Serling. He's literally the Rod Serling of movie props. He knows the story behind every single piece, and he loved sharing his knowledge. That's the real thing. And, since he just passed, I think the thing that I'm trying to deal with the most with him was looking at the things that are in his collection and the letters that he got. Because what would happen is somebody would fly from Kentucky or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Florida, and they'd fly to LA, and Bob would say, yeah, sure, come on over. You want to see the time machine? And he would invite people into his house that he didn't even know. He would give them a tour of the museum. They'd probably sit in the time machine and take pictures. But here's the funniest thing. They'd go home, they'd print the pictures, and then they'd send a letter to Bob thanking him for the visit with a photo of them and Bob in the time machine.
Oh, how sweet.
I found stacks and stacks of just that.
Wow.
Even to the point when I went to Bob's house for the first time, sat in the time machine, and left his house, drove to a 1-hour photo, sat in the parking lot, waiting for the pictures to get developed because I couldn't wait to experience again what I had just seen. That was the power of the gift that Bob gave all of us. And so now part of my legacy is now having the opportunity to try to preserve a lot of those pieces because, like we've been talking about, it wasn't expected to last longer than the shot.
Nobody was thinking conservation.
No, they just thought, oh yeah, the movie's over. Screw it. We'll throw it in the trash.
He's so beautiful. I totally understand why you want to see him every day.
I do see him every day. Look, if he was at my house, I wouldn't even see him as much.
Right.
That's why he's here. Plus, when people come by the shop, I want people to be inspired by it and to be like, look, this is an important piece of history. And, it's just the same as Bob's thing is like you want people to see it because you want them to be inspired. Because who knows? Maybe somebody that comes and sees it one day is like, oh, yeah, I'm going to make a werewolf movie, and I saw this really cool werewolf.
The number of amazing filmmakers that came through Bob's place in the 70s and 80s,
yes,
right?
Yes. Still, I mean, all of them, everybody. There's nobody that hasn't gone through Bob's house at one time or another, and
And that generosity, I think of that too with my collection about being generous, right?
Well, you have a show, so f*** you, because you have the perfect way to share your stuff. I don't have that way. Well, I do now.
Yeah, we're gonna have you on
here. I'll be your guest. I'll be your Robin to your Batman. But it's important to share everything that we love with people because it will inspire people. And for me, the best gift of The Walking Dead was it inspired a new generation of makeup artists because up to that point, nobody had ever seen anything like that on TV. They had never seen zombie makeups and stuff on TV, ever. Yeah. So when I have, like a 10-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl coming up and go, oh my God, I want to do what you do. I'm like, okay, that's my pay it forward moment. That's what Tom Savini and George Romero did for me, and now I get to pay it forward. So
that's beautiful, man. Thank you.
And now I'm on your show.
This is a good thing. I can't believe you stuck it out till the end. Well, now that you're here, let's talk about some of the cool stuff we have at adamsavage.com, our merch site. We make stuff for makers, and one of the most important tools a maker possesses is, of course, their laptop. That's why this year we are making 2 laptop sleeves, a large and a small, to protect your precious cargo. Like all of our products, they're made of upcycled materials, manufactured in the United States. And on each of these models, we have included a new feature, which is like my new favorite thing in the world, is this pencil holder with a rubber stamp of my name here. This is inspired by the NASA astronauts' name labels on the Apollo astronauts. And there's one on both sizes. Get yours today at adamsavage.com.